I'm 73 years old, and as it turns out, my own children think I'm an ATM machine. I never thought I'd live to see this. My name is Orson Bradley, and all my life I've been a surveyor, a man who measures the ground and helps architects figure out where and how to build. Not the most glamorous profession, but it gave me a steady income and a way to provide for my family. I've lived in Round Rock, Texas for almost 40 years, a quiet suburb where everyone knows each other and where Dorothea and I bought our house back in the early 80s. Dorothea was the love of my life. We met at a college dance, and from that moment I knew she was the one. We lived together for 49 years. 4 years ago, she passed away. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late. I still wake up sometimes and reach out to her side of the bed, even though I know I'll only find cold sheets there. Wesley is our only child. He was born when we were in our mid-30s and was, as Dorothea used to say, our little miracle after 5 years of trying without success. Maybe that's why we spoiled him too much. I don't know where we went wrong in our parenting, but now, looking at a 44-year-old man, I often wonder if this is really my son. Wesley married Paris Everett 12 years ago. I remember Dorothea whispering to me during their wedding, "She doesn't love him, Orson. She loves the idea of him." My wife has always been perceptive. Paris, with her bright red hair and hypnotic smile, was 10 years younger than Wesley, and when they met, she was working for his company as a junior office manager. Now she's an administrator at some fancy beauty salon downtown. I've never seen her really interested in work. It's always been something temporary for her, waiting for real life. Wesley works as an accountant for a company that makes parts for farm equipment. Stable job, decent paycheck. They live in a nice house in a new neighborhood, have 2 cars and a country club membership. Not millionaires, but certainly not poor. And yet every month they find a reason to ask me for money. After Dorothea's death, it became more noticeable. At first, they'd stop by almost every weekend to check on me, bring me food. Sometimes Paris even cleaned the house. I was grateful for the company. Loneliness is a strange thing. It creeps up unnoticed, especially in the evenings, when the house falls into silence and the ticking of the clock becomes deafening. At such times, the presence of another person, even if it's your not-so-nice sister-in-law, seems like a lifesaver. But gradually, I began to notice a pattern. Every visit they made ended with a conversation about money. "Dad, can you help with the dental bill for Paris?" Or, "Dad, I have an unexpected car expense. Can you help me out?" They were relatively small amounts at first, and I saw no reason to say no. I had savings, a not-so-small surveyor's pension, plus Dorothea's insurance. I could afford to help my only son, but my appetite grew. A year after Dorothea's death, Wesley talked about vacation for the first time. "Dad, Paris, and I are so exhausted. You can't imagine the stress we've been under at work. The doctor says I'm pre-hypertensive and Paris suffers from migraines." We were sitting on the porch of my house. It was April. The trees were turning tender green, and my roses, Dorothea's pride, which I continued to grow in her memory, were beginning to bloom. Paris was leafing through a magazine, pretending not to listen to our conversation, though I noticed the corner of her mouth twitch at the mention of vacation. "Pre-hypertension?" I asked her again. "Is it serious?" "The doctor says to avoid stress and get more rest." Wesley rubbed his temples like he had a headache. "We thought about going to the Caribbean, but that's, well, not really in our budget right now." "Well, it's not really in our budget." "What about insurance?" and I asked. "It's supposed to cover medical treatment." "Insurance only covers the basics, Dad. Everything's so expensive these days." Wesley sighed as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "We just thought maybe you could, help. You know how rarely we allow ourselves a vacation." It was a lie. They had gone on vacation at least twice a year for the past 3 years. I knew this because each time they shared pictures on the social media, and each time they asked me for money for the trip. But saying it out loud felt somehow wrong, like I was admitting that something was wrong between us. "How much are you thinking of spending?" I asked instead. "Well, a trip for 2 people for a week is about $5,000. But if you can't afford that much," Wesley paused, looking at me with the hopeful expression I remembered from his childhood when he asked for a new toy. "I'll think about it," I replied, feeling the irritation building inside. This wasn't the best time for this kind of talk. "Sure, Dad," Wesley agreed quickly. "We just wanted to get your opinion." After they left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking at Dorothea's roses. "What would you do, Thea?" I asked into the void. I could almost hear her answer. "Don't let them use you, Orson. You deserve respect." But in the end, I paid up. Not 5,000, but 7, because Paris called a week later and said they had found the perfect match. But it was a little more expensive. I wired the money and got an enthusiastic text back with lots of smiley faces from my sister-in-law. It became a tradition. Every few months, they would find a new reason why they needed the money. It was a leaky roof, a broken down car, an investment that was sure to pay off. And each time I gave in, telling myself it was the last one. After they returned from the Caribbean, Wesley came by to thank me in person. He brought a bottle of rum and a souvenir plate. "Thanks, Dad. That was just what we needed." "Are you feeling better? Is your blood pressure back to normal?" I asked, remembering his pre-hypertension. Wesley blinked as if he didn't know what I meant, then nodded quickly. "Yeah, sure. The doctor says he's fine. The sea works wonders." At that moment, I realized I'd been duped. There was no pre-hypertension. There was no medical condition. It was just that my son and his wife wanted a luxurious vacation at my expense. But I didn't say anything. Apparently, a part of me was still clinging to the image of the little boy who had once looked at me with adoration. Recently, going through old photo albums, I found a picture taken when Wesley was about 8. Dorothy and I took him fishing, and he caught his first fish, a small bass. In the picture, he's holding the fishing rod, his eyes shining with happiness, and I'm standing next to him with my hand on his shoulder, so proud. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to understand when and how my son turned into a man who only sees me as a source of funding for his comfortable life. 2 weeks ago, they came again. Paris was especially nice, bringing homemade pie, which I'm sure she bought at the store, helping me dust the top shelves, and even showing me how to use a video calling app so we could chat when they left. "Where are you going?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "We're thinking Mexico," Paris said, sitting down next to me on the couch as if we were best friends. Severanatulam is a magical place. White beaches, turquoise sea, ancient Mayan ruins. "Sounds expensive," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Not that expensive for what's on offer," Wesley replied quickly. "It's an investment in our health and well-being. Besides, we're both turning 45 this year." "You're 44 and Paris is 34, I corrected him. "Yeah," he said, a little embarrassed. "I meant that we're both approaching important dates. Anyway, it's a special year." "And how much does a special year cost?" "About 8,000 for 10 days, Paris answered with that special smile she finds disarming. "But that's with a flight and almost full board." I looked at them, these two adults who'd come to ask the old man for money for a luxury vacation, and felt something dark and bitter building up inside. Why don't they ever offer to take me with them? Why have I only had one vacation since Dorothea's death? At the lake house that belongs to my friend Quentin. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Sure, Dad," Wesley patted my shoulder. "We realize it's a large sum of money. Just think of it as an investment in our happiness. An investment in their happiness, not mine. Never mine." They left shortly thereafter, leaving me with the remains of the homemade pie and a bitter residue. The next day, Paris sent me a link to a hotel in Tulum. "Just so you see what we're talking about, it's a real paradise. 5-star resort, private beach, spa." I sat looking at these images and thought about how I've never pampered myself on a vacation like this. Dorothea and I had always been frugal. Our vacations usually included camping or renting a modest lake house. We were saving for retirement, for Wesley's education, for a rainy day. And now those savings were going to the luxurious whims of my son and his wife, who didn't seem to appreciate me or my money at all. 3 days later, I called Wesley and told him I'd agreed to pay for their trip. The enthusiastic thanks on their part sounded almost sincere. I wired the money and received a text from Paris saying, "You are the best father-in-law in the world. Let's get you something special." And the next day they came over for dinner. ostensibly to celebrate my generosity. Paris brought food from the restaurant. Wesley brought a bottle of wine. Everything was nice until, over dessert, Wesley leaned over to Paris and said with a smirk, looking at me, "Face it, honey, Daddy's just our walking wallet." And they both laughed, like it was the funniest joke ever. At that moment, something in me snapped completely. I didn't sleep much that night. My son's words kept playing in my head like a broken record. Just our walking wallet. I tossed from side to side, trying to find a position where my old bones wouldn't whimper and my heart wouldn't clench with resentment. When Dorothy and I had decided to have a child, I had imagined that I would have support in my old age, that my son would be my friend and support. I never imagined that I would become just a source of funding for him. By morning, I had made the decision that I would no longer silently tolerate their attitude. But action had to be taken carefully. A complete withdrawal of financial support would likely cause me to lose the crumbs of attention they were giving me as well. I needed something more enlightening. The week passed relatively quietly. I didn't call Wesley or Paris, and they were too busy planning their vacation to visit me. Friday night, the phone rang. Wesley's name popped up on the phone screen. "Dad, we were thinking," he began without preamble, "maybe we could go to that new restaurant downtown for dinner tomorrow night. I hear they have great steaks there." "Hadley's Grill?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what restaurant I was talking about. It was a fancy place that had opened a couple months ago, with prices that gave me a headache. "Yeah, that's right. They say it's got a great atmosphere. I've already made a reservation for 7. You're free, right?" Of course I was free. I was always free when Wesley suddenly remembered I existed, especially after I'd wired them the vacation money. "Yes, I'm free," I answered after a short pause. "Great. I'll see you tomorrow then. And Dad, wear that blue jacket Paris and I gave you for Christmas. It looks great on you." He disconnected without waiting for me to answer. I glanced at the phone in my hand, an old model that I refused to change, despite Wesley's constant teasing that, "It's time to live in the 21st century, Dad." I loved the simplicity of that phone. It made calls, sent messages, and that was enough. No apps watching my every move, no notifications to distract me from real life. On Saturday, I pulled that particular blue jacket out of my closet. It was really nice. Quality fabric, perfect fit. One of those gifts they gave with the express intention of making me look presentable in their company. I put it on, looked at myself in the mirror. Gray hair neatly trimmed. I've still been going to the same barber Roy for 30 years. Deep wrinkles around my eyes and mouth. The face of a man who has lived a long life. The face of a father whom his son considers just a wallet. I arrived at the restaurant at precisely 7 o'clock. Wesley and Paris were already waiting out front. Paris was in a new dress, dark green, emphasizing her red hair. Around her neck was a necklace with emeralds that I'm sure cost a small fortune. Wesley was wearing a suit I hadn't seen before. They looked like a successful couple ready to enjoy an evening at an expensive restaurant. On me, of course. "Dad, you look great," Paris exclaimed, kissing me on the cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume. "I told you that jacket looked great on you." "Thank you," I said discreetly. "You look good, too." "Our table's ready," Wesley said, putting an arm around my shoulders. I ordered the one overlooking the river. The restaurant inside was even more pretentious than I'd expected. Dark wood, dim lights, waiters in white shirts and black vests. Our table did have a great view of the Colorado River, glistening in the setting sun. As soon as we were seated, the sommelier came over with a wine list. "What will you be drinking tonight?" he asked in a slight French accent. Before I could answer, Wesley took the list. "A bottle of Chateau Margaux 2015, please." I knew that wine. I knew its price, too. About $500 a bottle. "Wesley, how about something a little more simple?" I suggested cautiously. "Come on, Dad." He smiled his charming smile that he used when he wanted to get something. "Tonight is a special night. We want to thank you for your help with our vacation." Thank me with my own money, I thought, but kept silent. Dinner continued in the same vein. They ordered the most expensive dishes, the most elaborate appetizers. Paris talked about her vacation plans, how they were going to rent a yacht for a day to sail along the coast of Tulum, about the spa treatments she planned to attend. How about you, Dad? Wesley suddenly asked when desserts were brought to us. Don't you get bored by yourself? I'm doing okay, I replied. I have my books, my garden. You need to socialize more, Paris interrupted as she poured herself a chocolate mousse. Maybe join some kind of club for... She hesitated, obviously searching for a word that didn't sound like old people. For people your age? I socialized with friends, I said, remembering Quentin, with whom we regularly play chess on Tuesdays. I'm doing well. So, sure, Dad, Wesley patted my arm indulgently. We're just worried about you. If you were really worried, you'd spend more time with me. Not just when you need money, I thought. But again, I remained silent. When the bill came, Wesley pretended to reach for his pocket, but I knew the game. Let me, I said, pulling out my wallet. Are you sure, Dad? We were going to buy you a drink. His feigned resistance was so transparent it made me physically uncomfortable. It's okay. I put the credit card on the tray with the bill. You're so generous, Paris sang out, stroking my hand. We so appreciate everything you do for us. It was at that moment that Wesley leaned over to his wife and, lowering his voice, but not enough for me not to hear, said, He's not generous, honey. He just knows his role. Daddy is our trusted family ATM. They both laughed quietly, thinking I hadn't heard or maybe didn't pay attention. But I did hear, and this time their words hit even harder than last time, because now it wasn't just a casual joke at home, but a deliberate humiliation in a public place. I kept a stony expression on my face as the waiter processed my card. $387 for one dinner, more than I'd spent on food in an entire month. Thank you for a lovely evening, I said, getting up from the table. I should get home. I have to get up early tomorrow. On Sunday? Paris was surprised. Where are you going? I have things to do, I said evasively. Do you want us to give you a ride? Wesley offered, though I could see in his eyes that he hoped I'd say no. No, I'll take my car. Oh no. I'll see you next week then? Paris blew me a kiss. We'll stop by before we leave to say goodbye. Sure, I said, and walked out of the restaurant. The night air was cool and fresh after the stuffy restaurant. I inhaled deeply, trying to calm my raging emotions. Reaching my old Toyota, I got behind the wheel, but I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I just sat there looking out the lighted windows of the restaurant where my son and his wife were probably still laughing at me. When I finally arrived home, the first thing I did was pour myself a whiskey. Not the cheap bourbon I usually drink, but the single malt scotch that Dorothea had given me for our last birthday together. For a special occasion, she'd said at the time. Well, if the realization that your only son thinks you're just a wallet isn't a special occasion, then what is? I sat down in the chair by the window, the same one where Dorothea liked to read in the evenings. Taking a sip of whiskey, I let the bitterness burn not only my throat but also my soul. How had we gotten to this point? Where had I gone wrong in my upbringing? Wesley had always been a bit spoiled, but as a child it seemed cute. His delight at a new toy, his joy at going to the amusement park. When did that childish thirst for new experiences turn into outright greed of a grown man? And what's worse, I let it continue. Year after year, I opened my wallet, justifying it with parental love. I just want him to have everything I didn't have, I told myself. But the truth is, I was just afraid of being all alone. Afraid that if I stopped giving money, I'd lose even the rare moments when Wesley and Paris showed up in my life. But after tonight, I realized I'd already lost my son. The Wesley I raised, the one who looked at me with adoration and called me his hero, is long gone. All that was left was this calculating grown man who only saw me as a source of funding. I finished my whiskey and made a decision. No more being the silent victim. It's time to teach them a lesson they'll remember for a long time. In the morning, I called Quentin. We've known each other since college, more than 50 years of friendship, through all the ups and downs. He'd been best man at my wedding to Dorothea, Wesley's godfather, and the only one who'd visited me regularly since my wife's death without asking for anything in return. Orson, you old geezer. His voice was as energetic as ever, despite the early hour. To what do I owe this early call? I need your advice, Quent. I cut right to the chase. And maybe some help. Sounds serious. Come for lunch. Martha's making her signature apple pie. 3 hours later, I was sitting on the veranda of Quentin's house, sipping lemonade and watching his wife, Martha, tending to the flowers in the garden. They lived in a small house on the outskirts of Austin, modest but cozy. Unlike Wesley, Quentin's children, three daughters, all successful and independent, regularly visited their parents, brought their grandchildren and called just to chat. This is the kind of relationship I always wanted to have with my son. "So what's up?" Quentin asked when Martha had gone into the house to prepare dinner. I told him everything about the constant requests for money, the trips I'd funded, and finally the joke about the wallet. Quentin listened without interrupting, only occasionally frowning or shaking his head. "They don't appreciate you, Orson," he said when I was done. "They never will if you keep letting them treat you like this." "I know," I sighed. "That's why I came to you. I need to do something. Something to make them realize how much they're hurting me." "You could just stop giving them money," Quentin suggested. "Say no the next time they ask. They'll just find a way to make me feel guilty. Or stop showing up altogether." I shook my head. "No, I needed something more visual," Quentin thought, tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair. "You said they were planning to go to Tulum? Luxury resort? Beaches? All-inclusive?" "Yeah, in 2 weeks. I already paid for the trip. What if—" Quentin leaned toward me, a mischievous glint in his eyes that I remembered from college when we were planning our next prank. "What if they don't get the vacation they're hoping for?" "What do you mean?" "My nephew Derek works for a travel agency. He specializes in exotic destinations. Not those formulaic resorts for pampered tourists, but real adventure. Places that don't have five-star hotels and buffets, where you have to adapt. I'm starting to see where he's going with this. You're suggesting we replace their luxury vacation with something less luxurious?" "Exactly," Quentin smiled. "Let them think they're going to paradise, but they'll end up, let's just say, a more authentic Mexico. Without air conditioning, five-star service, and all the other frills. Where they'd be exposed to real life, not this artificial bourgeois parody of it." The idea was tempting, very tempting. Wesley and Paris had always been snobs when it came to comfort. Paris had once thrown a tantrum in a restaurant because her salad had spinach instead of arugula, and Wesley refused to stay in hotels below 4 stars. "That's pretty cruel," I said, but I couldn't help smiling at the thought of their faces when they realized that what awaited them wasn't a white beach and an umbrella martini, but something else entirely. "No harsher than calling your own father a wallet," Quentin remarked. "Besides, it will be an eye-opening experience. Maybe they'll finally realize how good their lives are because of you." We discussed the details of the plan until lunchtime, and the more we talked, the more I liked the idea. Later, Quentin called his nephew, and he promised to come to my house tomorrow to discuss the technical details. Returning home in the evening, I felt lighter than I had in many months. For the first time since Dorothea died, I had purpose, excitement, anticipation. Not the most noble of feelings, but they made the blood run faster through my old veins. "You're just a wallet," my son said. Well, that wallet is in store for a surprise they won't forget. The next day, Derek arrived at my house. A tall man of about 35 with cheerful eyes and confident movements. He didn't look like a typical tourist office worker. Tanned with sunburned hair, he looked more like a traveler who had just returned from a long journey. "Uncle Quentin told me your situation, Mr. Bradley," Derek said, sitting down at my kitchen table. "And I think I have exactly what you need." He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. It showed a map of Mexico, but not the Yucatan coast where Tulum is, but a completely different region. "This is the state of Oaxaca," he explained. "There's a village called San Miguel de Allende, 6 hours from the nearest tourist center. It's a very authentic place. There are no five-star hotels, spas, or any of the other perks of civilization that spoiled tourists love so much. But there are stunning mountains, local culture, and complete immersion in real Mexico." "And what are the uh, living conditions there?" I asked, anticipating Paris's reaction to the authentic conditions. "Very basic." Derek couldn't hold back a smile. "There's a guest house, essentially just a big shack with a few rooms. Electricity works intermittently. There's no hot water at all. Internet. Let's just say there's a cafe 2 kilometers away where you can sometimes get a signal." Sounds, harsh. I felt a slight prick of conscience. But then I remembered my son's words and nodded decisively. Perfect. Don't worry, it's a perfectly safe place, Derek assured me, apparently noticing my second hesitation. It's just a long way from the amenities of modern civilization. The locals are friendly, but they speak mostly Nahuatl and very little Spanish. English is practically unknown there. My son and his wife don't speak Spanish either, I remarked. Well, it will be a good thing for their cultural enrichment, Derek winked at me. The most important thing is transportation. There's a bus from the village to the nearest town every 3 days. You can't call a cab. There's just no cell phone service there. So if they decide to leave early, they'd have to get creative. The plan was working out perfectly. Instead of a luxurious resort with private beaches, spa, and all the amenities, Wesley and Paris would end up in the middle of nowhere, in primitive conditions with no way to get out quickly. 10 days in a place like this will seem like an eternity. How do we organize this technically? I asked. They'll need airplane tickets, documents. Shuo, leave that to me, Derek said confidently. I'll prepare everything from brochures with pictures of the luxury resort to real airline tickets. They'll take a regular flight to Mexico City, and my colleague will meet them there, explain that there have been some changes in the route, and escort them to Oaxaca. And they'll just agree to go to a different destination than they had planned. Oh, we'll make it very convincing, Derek said with a sly smile. We'll say that there's been a natural disaster in Tulum, a hurricane or something, and that all the tourists are being rerouted to safer areas, and that we organized a unique tour especially for them, an exclusive immersion into the real Mexican culture. Believe me, my coworkers are very convincing. By the time they realize they've been duped, it'll be too late. And the cost? That wasn't my main question, but still, much less than that luxury resort in Tulum, Derek assured me. But we can make it so they won't know about it. The rest of the money can be put back into your account. We spent another hour working out the details of the plan. Derek turned out to be a real professional. He had planned every little detail, from the fake brochures to the cover story for the greeters. When he left, promising to return in 3 days with the finished documents, I felt a strange excitement, a mixture of anticipation and slight anxiety. That evening, Paris called. Hi, Daddy. Her voice sounded too sweet. How are you? Wesley and I were thinking of stopping by tomorrow to show you our new swimsuits for the trip. You'll be home, right? Sure, I answered, trying to sound normal. I'll be expecting you for lunch. Great, I'll cook something special, she promised and disconnected. I hung up the phone, feeling the resolve building inside me. Daddy, it meant. How convenient to use affectionate addresses when you want to get something. The next day they arrived at 12 sharp. Paris had indeed brought food, some elaborate sandwiches from a fancy cafe and a bottle of white wine. Wesley was in high spirits, constantly checking something on his phone and smiling. Do you have good news? I asked, helping Paris set the plates on the table. Just looking forward to the vacation, Dad, Wesley replied, putting his phone away. There's only 10 days left. You have no idea how tired we are and how much we need this vacation. I thought about the fact that my last real vacation was 5 years ago, when Dorothy and I went to Lake Tahoe. The year before, she was diagnosed. Since then, I've hardly been out of Round Rock except for the occasional trip to Quentin's. Yes, rest is important, I said neutrally. During lunch, they talked mostly about the trip, what excursions they wanted to take, what restaurants to try, how Paris planned to spend the day at the spa. By the way, Dad, Wesley said suddenly, sipping his wine, we've been thinking maybe you should go somewhere else too. You know, get away. You haven't been away since Mom died. I almost choked. Are they suddenly looking out for my well-being? Yeah, I thought about it, I answered cautiously. I could look into some senior tours for you, Paris offered enthusiastically. You know, those special programs with medical support, just to make you feel safe. Oh, that's it. Of course, they need to make sure I can continue to pay for their lavish lifestyle, that I don't spend my savings on myself. Thank you, Paris, but I can take care of myself, I tried to say calmly. In fact, I have a surprise for you. Surprise? Wesley looked at me suspiciously. What kind of surprise? You'll see the day after tomorrow. Why don't you stop by my place before work? 8 o'clock? They exchanged glances, clearly intrigued. Sure, Dad, Wesley said at last. We'll be there. 2 days later, at exactly 8 in the morning, They showed up on my doorstep. Paris looked a little annoyed. She didn't like to get up early, and Wesley was tense. "So, what surprise did you have in store for us?" he asked, barely entering the house. I smiled and handed them a beautiful folder with the logo of Exotic Travels of Mexico, a fake agency that Derek had created specifically for our operation. "What's this?" Paris took the folder and opened it. Inside were glossy brochures with pictures of a luxury resort, taken, Derek explained, from an advertisement for a completely different hotel in Bali, a map of the resort's exclusive grounds, and a detailed program of the stay. "I decided to give you a gift," I said. "Change your reservation to a more impressive. This is a closed VIP resort in a special part of Tulum, for select clients only." Paris's eyes widened as she perused the brochure. "A private beach? A private butler? Orson, that would cost a fortune." "You deserve it, darling," I smiled, savoring the moment. "You both did. Dad, it's—" Wesley looked genuinely touched. "It's incredibly generous, but we can't accept such an expensive gift." "Of course we can," Paris quickly objected, giving her husband a glare. "Nakiptorn, if your father wants to spoil us, we should gratefully accept his generosity." "I insist," I said firmly. "Consider it my contribution to your happiness." "Thanks, Dad." Wesley hugged me, and I could hear the sincere gratitude in his voice. For a second, I felt ashamed. But then I remembered all those times when they used me, all those jokes about the wallet, and the guilt disappeared. "Here are your new tickets and documents." I handed them the envelope Derek had prepared. "The flight will not change, but you will be met differently. At the airport in Mexico City, find a man with a sign that says, Bradley Family VIP. He'll escort you to the resort's special transportation." "Oh my God, Orson, it's like a movie," Paris exclaimed enthusiastically, looking through the documents. "Can you imagine what my friends will say when they find out?" "Just don't tell anyone yet," I said quickly, remembering Derek's warning. "It's a very exclusive place, and they don't like publicity." Of course," Paris nodded, though I could see in her eyes that she was already mentally compiling a list of people she would brag to. "And one more favor," I added. "Don't call me for the first 3 days. I, too, have decided to take your advice and get some rest. I'm going to Quentin's lake house where the connection is very bad." "That's a great idea, Dad," Wesley approved. "You really need a change of scenery. Don't worry, we'll be too busy enjoying our vacation to bother you with calls." "Oh, if you only knew," I thought, but just smiled back. The next 10 days passed in feverish preparation. Paris kept calling me, asking about the most ridiculous details. "Orson, do you think I should get a gold or silver swimsuit for the first day?" "Orson, the brochure says the resort restaurant has a French chef. Do you think he makes a real ratatouille?" I replied with the patience of a saint, enjoying the irony of the situation. She was preparing for a luxurious vacation that would actually turn out to be the most primitive experience of her life. Part of me felt an almost sadistic satisfaction at the thought. The day before they left, we met one last time. They took me out to dinner, this time to a more modest restaurant than usual. Paris was uncharacteristically nice, even helping me with the menu when I forgot my glasses. Wesley talked about his vacation plans, how they would swim with dolphins, visit ancient Mayan ruins, enjoy exotic cuisine. And I also ordered a surprise for Paris, a romantic dinner on the beach by candlelight, he shared when his wife went to the ladies' room. "I want to thank her for putting up with my work delays and constant stress." At this point, I felt bad again. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe they're just regular people with their own flaws and I've turned into a vindictive old man. But then Paris came back, and literally the first thing she said was, "Orson, will you remember to water my orchids while we're gone? I brought them to you last week, remember?" I didn't remember, because she never brought me any orchids. It was just another manipulation, another way to make me feel needed so she could use me later. "Of course, Paris, don't worry," I replied, and the last of my doubts vanished. The morning of their departure came. I volunteered to drive them to the airport, the final touch to my role as a caring father and father-in-law. Paris was agitated, constantly checking her luggage for fear of forgetting something. Wesley was calmer, but I could see his eyes sparkle with anticipation. "Thanks again, Dad," he said as we pulled up to the terminal. It really means a lot to us. You're welcome, son, I replied, hugging him goodbye. You deserve the best. Paris kissed my cheek, leaving a lipstick mark. You are the best father-in-law in the world, Orson. We'll bring you so many souvenirs. I waved at them as they drove away from the airport, and then I got in the car and took a deep breath. It was done. Now all that was left was to wait. When I got home, I packed a small bag, a few changes of clothes, a book I'd been meaning to read for a long time, a chessboard for my games with Quentin. Then I called my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, and asked her to watch the house while I was away. Sorry, room. I'm going to a friend's lake house for a week, I explained. I wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city for a while. It's about time, Orson, Mrs. Henderson approved. You deserve a vacation after all you've done for your son and that wife. Mrs. Henderson never hid her disapproval of Paris, calling her nothing but that woman or your daughter-in-law as if she had a lemon in her mouth. I checked my phone. By now, Wesley and Paris should have boarded the plane. No messages. Well, they shouldn't have suspected anything until they arrived in Mexico City, and there they would be met by a VIP resort representative, actually a friend of Derek's, who would explain to them that due to the recent hurricane, all the resorts in Tulum were closed, and they were being offered alternative accommodations at a unique, authentic location. I turned off my phone, got in my car, and headed toward Quentin's house. I had a week of peace and quiet ahead of me, while my son and his wife enjoyed a luxury vacation in a remote village with no hot water, internet, or air conditioning. The drive to Quentin's lake house took about 3 hours. It was a secluded spot away from the tourist trails, a small wooden house on the shore surrounded by pine trees. The perfect place to hide from the world and from the calls of angry relatives. Quentin met me on the porch, fishing rod in hand. Well, old man, is it done? He asked, shaking my hand. It's done, I confirmed, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. They boarded the plane, unsuspecting. Great, Quentin clapped me on the shoulder. Now we just have to wait and enjoy the silence. What about fishing? There's a great bite today. We spent the day on the lake, fishing and reminiscing about old times. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. No obligations, no guilt, no need to conform to anyone's expectations. It was liberating. In the evening, sitting on the veranda with a glass of whiskey, I imagined Wesley and Paris arriving in Mexico City, being greeted by a resort representative, getting into a car, expecting to be in paradise in a few hours, and how gradually the landscape outside the window becomes wilder and wilder, the road worse, and their bewilderment more and more intense. To justice, said Quentin, raising his glass. To life lessons, I replied, and we clinked glasses. I decided not to turn on my phone. Let Wesley and Paris fully immerse themselves in their new experience, without being able to call me right away with complaints. Let them feel what it was like to be cut off from their usual comforts, with no immediate help. Let them realize that money can't always solve all problems. After all, the most important lessons in life are often the most painful. The following days passed in blissful tranquility. Quentin and I fished, played chess, grilled caught fish, and reminisced about our youth. I could feel the tension of the last few months gradually leaving my body, my slouching shoulders straightening from age. On the 5th day, I decided it was time to see how my travelers were doing. I turned on my phone and saw what I expected. 157 missed calls and many angry messages. I smiled. The plan had worked perfectly. 157 missed calls. The numbers on the screen seemed almost unreal. Leafing through the list, I could see the desperation building. The first few calls were an hour or two apart. Then they started coming in every 15 to 20 minutes, and for the last 2 days, the calls had been coming in almost continuously, mostly from Paris, but Wesley had shown unusual persistence as well. The messages were even more telling. I scrolled through them, watching the evolution of my traveler's emotions. The first message from Paris sent on the day of arrival. Orson, what's the big joke? We were brought to some dirty village instead of a resort. Call me back immediately. 3 hours later from Wesley. Dad, if this is your idea of a joke, it's not funny. There's nothing here that was in the brochures. Call me as soon as you get this message. Another 4 hours later, again from Paris, already using capital letters. Orson, do you have any idea where we are? There's not even hot water here. Call me back now." Then the messages became more and more desperate. Wesley wrote that they were trying to get out of the village, but the nearest bus wouldn't be for another 2 days. Paris complained about mosquitoes, no air conditioning, terrible food, and locals who don't understand a word of English. The last message was from Wesley, sent last night. "Dad, I don't know if you're getting our messages, but if you are, please help us get out of here. Paris is sick. She has a fever and some kind of rash from the local water. We're stuck in this hole, and I can't even call a cab because there's no communication here. I had to walk 2 kilometers to the only place with internet to send this message." I set the phone aside, feeling a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, satisfaction. My plan had worked even better than I'd expected. They'd gotten exactly the lesson I'd hoped for. On the other hand, the mention of Paris's illness gave me a prick of anxiety. I wanted to teach them a lesson, but I didn't want anyone to really get hurt. "Is everything all right, old boy?" Quentin asked, noticing my frown. "Sure, can I do one?" "Paris is sick," I said, handing him the phone. "Maybe we overreacted." Quentin looked at the messages and shook his head. "I bet she's exaggerating. Probably just normal acclimatization or a mild stomach upset from the unfamiliar food. Derek said there was a medic in the village. If something was really serious, they'd go to him." "Are you sure?" I was still feeling uneasy. "Let's check." Quentin pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Derek, it's Quentin. How are our travelers?" He put the phone on speaker, and I could hear Derek laughing. "Oh, they're perfectly fine, except for the fact that they're completely unaccustomed to real life," he said cheerfully. "My friend Jorge is keeping an eye on them. He says the woman's really a little sick. A mild eating disorder, nothing serious. The local witch doctor gave her some herbal tea, and she's feeling better." "Are you sure they're all right?" I asked, leaning over the phone. "They're not in any danger?" "Absolutely no danger, Mr. Bradley," Derek assured me. "The village is safe. The people are friendly. It's just that the conditions are Spartan, let's just say. None of the comforts they're used to. Your son, by the way, is starting to adjust. Yesterday, he was helping the locals fix the roof of the community center. His wife, on the other hand." Derek chuckled. "Let's just say she's not cut out for village life." I pictured Wesley, my son, who'd never held a hammer in his life, helping fix the roof, and Paris, with her impeccable manicure and perpetual complaints, trying to cope with the lack of hot showers and Wi-Fi. The picture was so ridiculous that I couldn't hold back a smile. "When are they due back?" I asked. "Their return tickets are for the day after tomorrow," Derek replied. "Jorge will take them to the airport in Mexico City." "Don't worry, Mr. Bradley. Everything is going according to plan." After talking to Derek, I felt a little calmer. At least they're not in any real danger. They're just experiencing a lot of discomfort, something they're completely unaccustomed to. "So are you satisfied?" Quentin asked when we sat down to dinner. "The plan worked as planned." "Yes, but now I have to face them," I sighed, imagining what awaited me. "Cherie, they'll be furious." "They deserve a good lesson," Quentin said firmly. "Maybe now they'll think twice before calling you wallet." That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. Lying in the dark, I ran through possible scenarios in my head about the upcoming meeting with Wesley and Paris. Would they yell, threaten, perhaps refuse to deal with me at all? Strangely, the last option didn't seem as frightening as it had before. The week I spent with Quentin reminded me that there are other forms of communication besides extorting money. The next day, Quentin and I decided to go fishing one last time before I left. It was a warm fall day. The sun glistened on the surface of the lake, and a light breeze brought the smell of pine trees. We were sitting in a small boat, casting our fishing rods, and talking about the past, about college, about our first jobs, about how we met our wives. "You know," Quentin said suddenly, looking at the float, "I've always been a little jealous of you and Dorothea. You had a special relationship." "Yes," I agreed, feeling the familiar dull ache that always came at the mention of my wife. "She was an amazing woman." "She would have approved of what you did," Quentin said thoughtfully. "She never tolerated being mistreated." I remembered how once, when we first started dating, some drunk guy in a bar had shoved me and called me a bore. Dorothea, a frail girl about 6 feet tall, stood up to him and told him off so badly that the guy finally apologized and bought me a drink. She was always my protector, my bulldog, as I jokingly called her. Yeah, she'd give them a hard time. I smiled at the memory. You know, Quent, I'm not sure this lesson will change anything. Maybe they'll just hate me and never want to see me again. Maybe, Quentin agreed. But in that case, they don't deserve to be in your life. You deserve respect, Orson, especially from your own son. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. It was exactly what Dorothea had told me in the last months of her life, when Wesley had begun to show his true nature. Don't let him use you, Orson. You deserve respect. In the evening, I started packing for the return trip. I needed to get home before Wesley and Paris flew in from Mexico. I wanted to meet them on my property, in my home, where I felt more confident. Call if you need anything, Quentin said, hugging me goodbye. And don't let them pressure you. You did what you had to do. On the way home, I turned my phone back on. There were no new messages. They were probably still in the village, with no access to communications. I imagined their frustration, their anger, their helplessness. Did I feel a sense of satisfaction? Yes, absolutely. But also a strange unease, as if I had crossed some invisible line. When I arrived home, it was already dark. The house greeted me with silence and coolness. I turned on the light, put the kettle on, and looked around. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, but somehow it seemed different. Or was it me that had changed over the week? I made tea and sat back in my chair, thinking about what had happened and what was yet to come. Revenge was sweet, but not what I expected. I thought I was going to feel pure schadenfreude, but instead I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction, guilt, and liberation? Yes, perhaps that was the most accurate word. It was as if I'd finally shed the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years. In the morning, I was woken up by the phone ringing. It was Derek. Good morning, Mr. Bradley, he said cheerfully. I just wanted to let you know that your relatives arrived safely in Mexico City. Jorge drove them to the airport. They're flying out this afternoon, so they'll be home by tonight. How are they? I asked. Well, Derek hesitated. Let's just say they're not in the best of moods. Your daughter-in-law refused to talk to Jorge, and your son was quite abrupt. But physically, they're fine, if that's what you're worried about. Thank you, Derek, I said. And thank you for everything you've done. You're welcome. I could almost hear his smile. If you ever want to go on a real adventure yourself, instead of this touristy nonsense, let me know. I have some great itineraries for people your age. After talking to Derek, I decided to get ready to meet Wesley in Paris. I knew they would probably come to see me as soon as they landed, angry, tired, and ready to unleash their anger on me. I needed to get my thoughts together and decide what I was going to tell them. I spent the day tidying up the house, cooking a simple dinner, though I doubted they would eat with me, and mentally rehearsing my speech. I wasn't going to apologize. They deserved what they got. But I wanted to explain my motives to them, to let them know that their behavior had hurt me. Toward evening, I called Mrs. Henderson. How was your vacation, Orson? She asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice. You looked rested when I saw you through the window. Yes, it was wonderful, I replied. Quiet, peaceful, stress-free. I'm glad to hear that. By the way, did you already know that yours are back from Mexico? I saw a cab outside their house a couple hours ago. That means they're already home, and they haven't come to see me yet. That's weird. I expected them to rush over right away to tell me what they think. Thank you for the information, Marjorie, I said. I expect them to visit soon. Just don't let them get on your neck, Mrs. Henderson warned me. I saw that sister-in-law of yours getting out of a cab. She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, and so tanned she looked like a tomato. I suppressed a chuckle as I pictured Paris, with her flawless skin on which she'd tested dozens of creams and lotions, turning into a tomato. Another little bonus to my revenge. By evening, they still hadn't shown up. I began to worry. Maybe they had decided to stop communicating with me altogether. On the one hand, that would make sense. But on the other hand, it was a little hurtful. I wanted to explain my motives to them, wanted them to understand how their behavior had hurt me all these years. Around 9 p.m., the phone rang. Wesley's name popped up on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered it. Hello, son. Dad. His voice sounded tired and a little hoarse. We're back. I know, I said. Mrs. Henderson saw you arrive. How was the trip? There was a long pause, and then Wesley said, with ill-concealed anger, You know very well how our trip went. You're the one who arranged it, aren't you? Yes. I didn't see the point in denying it. I wanted you to have a special experience. A special experience? His voice rose an octave. You call this a special experience? We spent 10 days in a filthy village without hot water, proper food, or basic amenities. Paris got sick from the local water. She still has an upset stomach. And I got some weird rash from the local plants when I was helping fix the damn roof. I'm sorry you're sick, I said sincerely. It wasn't part of my plans. Oh, so you had plans? The sarcasm in his voice was almost palpable. Let me guess. You wanted to teach us a lesson, didn't you? Show us how ordinary people live? Or was it revenge for something? Not something, Wesley. Everything, I tried to say calmly. For the way you've treated me over the last few years. The way you've used me. For the way you've called me wallet. Again the pause, longer this time. You heard that? It wasn't a question, but a statement. Of course I heard it, I answered. For some, and more than once. It was just a joke, Dad. His tone became conciliatory. We didn't mean anything by it. Jokes are usually funny to everyone in the conversation, I pointed out. I wasn't amused. And that's why you decided to send us to this shithole? Make us suffer? I wanted you to understand what it's like to be treated differently than you expect. How it feels to feel cheated and used. Wesley sighed heavily. We'll come back tomorrow, he said after a pause. We need to talk in person. We're too tired today. Of course, I agreed. I'll expect you tomorrow at lunchtime. After my conversation with my son, I couldn't calm down for a long time. I walked around the house trying to figure out how I felt. Satisfaction, yes. A slight sense of guilt that they were sick, yes. But a strange sense of liberation and pride? Yeah, I guess that's what it was. Pride that I'd finally stood up for myself, that I hadn't let myself be used like I had in years past. I went to bed with a firm decision. Whatever the consequences of tomorrow's conversation, I would not back down. It was a necessary lesson, and I will not apologize for it. If Wesley and Paris decide to stop communicating with me because of it, well, that will be their choice. But I will no longer silently tolerate disrespect and manipulation. You'd be proud of me, Thea, I whispered before I went to sleep, imagining Dorothea smiling at me from the picture on my bedside table. In the morning, I woke up with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in a long time. I made a simple lunch. Nothing fancy, just chicken soup and homemade bread from Dorothea's recipe. Not to placate Wesley and Paris, but because cooking always calmed me down, helped me get my thoughts together. At 12:30, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. A minute later, there was a firm knock on the door. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders and went to open it, ready for any development. I opened the door and barely recognized my relatives. Wesley looked gaunt, with overgrown stubble and a burnt nose. His usually neat haircut had turned into a disheveled mess of hair, and his arms were covered with red patches, apparently the rash he'd mentioned. But the real revelation was Paris, her usually perfectly styled red hair in a sloppy ponytail, her skin the color of an overripe tomato, and dark circles under her eyes. They were both dressed in wrinkled clothes that were in obvious need of washing. Come in, I said, stepping aside. They walked silently into the living room. Paris flopped down on the couch like she'd been on her feet for the last 10 days, and Wesley stood with his arms crossed over his chest. I made lunch, I said, breaking the heavy silence. If you're hungry. We're not hungry, Wesley said. We're here to talk. Shinominum. Okay, I sat down in the chair across from the couch. I'm listening. Wesley paced around the room as if he couldn't sit still. You sent us to hell, he said finally, stopping and looking me straight in the eye. Do you know what we've been through in these 10 days? I have a general idea, I answered calmly. A general idea, Paris intervened, her voice shaking with anger. Do you have any idea what it's like to live without hot water? No decent food. No way to even call for help. Actually, I do, I said. I grew up in a house without central heating or hot water. Dorothea and I lived in an apartment for the first 2 years of our marriage where we had to heat water on the stove to take a bath. It seemed to take them by surprise for a moment. That was a long time ago, Wesley said. Times are different now. Times haven't changed that much for millions of people around the world, I pointed out. What you consider basic amenities are still luxuries for many. Don't lecture us, Paris exclaimed, jumping up from the couch. Do you know that my stomach still hurts? That I got some kind of intestinal infection from their dirty water? I'm sorry you're sick, Paris, I said sincerely. It wasn't part of my plan. Oh, so you had a plan? Wesley started pacing around the room again. Tell us about this great plan, Dad. About how you conspired with that fake travel agent. How you forged the documents. How you tricked us into going to this shithole. Yes, I had a plan. I saw no point in denying it. A plan to teach you a lesson. To show you what happens when people aren't treated the way they expect to be treated. When they're deceived and used. And who was deceiving you, Dad? Wesley asked with bitter irony. Who used you? You, I answered simply. Both of you. For years. That statement seemed to stun them. Paris sank back onto the couch, and Wesley froze in place. We? He interjected. What do you mean? You only come to me when you need something, I began, feeling the long-contained irritation building up inside. Usually money. You're never interested in my life, my problems. To you, I'm just a source of funding for your whims. A walking wallet, as you said yourself, Wesley. It was just a joke, Dad. Wesley looked a little embarrassed. A silly joke after a couple glasses of wine. Jokes have a way of revealing true thoughts, I pointed out. But it's not just the joke. It's about the way you've treated me over the last few years, especially since Dorothea's death. We've taken care of you, Paris objected. I've cleaned your house, cooked for you. When? I interrupted her. In the last 4 years, you've dusted the living room maybe a couple times, and each time it was before asking for money. Paris opened her mouth to object, but then closed it, apparently unable to find anything to say. Sir, we've always honored your feelings, Wesley tried. We've always been grateful for your help. Grateful? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. You call that gratitude? When you take my money for granted? When you laugh at me behind my back? When you use me to fund your lavish lifestyle without giving a second thought to how I feel? Wesley looked like I'd punched him. He slumped down on the couch next to Paris. I didn't think you'd see it that way, he said quietly. We're just used to you always helping us. Exactly, I nodded. You're used to it. Used to old Orson always paying. That he'd never say no, never resent, never demand respect. Is that why you decided to punish us? There was resentment in Paris's voice. Send us to this horrible village? I decided to show you what it's like when your expectations aren't met, to be deceived by those you trust. There was a heavy silence. I saw Wesley and Paris look at each other, clearly unsure of what to say. Do you have any idea how I felt all these years? I continued when it was clear they weren't going to answer. Every time you called, I knew a request for money would follow. Every visit ended with me opening my wallet. And not once did you offer to take me on a trip with you, to enjoy what I'm paying for. We thought you wouldn't want to, Paris mumbled, looking down at the floor. You're always so homely. You never asked, I replied. Never wondered what I wanted. To you, I was just an old man who sits at home and dutifully writes checks when asked. Wesley ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd adopted from me as a teenager. It reminded me of the times when we'd been closer, when he'd actually looked at me with respect instead of like an ATM. I realized that we haven't always been on the right side of things, he finally said. But what you did, it was cruel, Dad. Cruel? I shook my head. Cruel is when your own son makes fun of you and calls you a patsy. Cruel is when people who should love you only see you as a source of money. What I did was, an educational experience. An educational experience, Paris snorted, but there was no longer the same confidence in her voice. You call 10 days in filth and squalor an educational experience? Yes, I said firmly, because now you know how most of the world lives. And maybe you've learned to appreciate the privileges you have because of me. Wesley was silent for a long time, looking at his rash-covered hands. You know what's weird, Dad? He finally said. At one point, when I was helping the locals fix the roof of the community center, I really felt something special. Like I was doing something important, something real, not just sitting in an office shifting papers. This confession took me by surprise. I was expecting anger and accusations, but not this glimmer of self-awareness. They were so happy, Wesley continued thoughtfully. Near, despite the fact that they had almost nothing by our standards. They sang as they worked, joking around. And when we were done, they threw a real feast with local food and homemade booze. I've never seen such, uh, genuine fun. Paris threw her husband an incredulous look. What are you talking about? It was horrible. Those insects, that food you couldn't eat, those primitive toilets. Yes, it was hard, Wesley agreed, but there were some good moments. Remember that old woman who cured your stomach with herbs? Or the kids who taught us the local games? Paris frowned but didn't argue. I watched this exchange with growing amazement. Perhaps my plan had worked better than I'd expected. That doesn't change the fact that what you did was wrong, Wesley said, turning to me. You tricked us, sent us to a dangerous place without our consent. Not that dangerous, I countered. Derek assured me that the village was perfectly safe, and you had his friend Jorge to watch over you. The same Jorge who'd brought us there under false pretenses and then left us in the care of locals who didn't even speak English? Paris raised an eyebrow sarcastically. Yes, just the paragon of caring. He checked on you regularly, I said, and he was in touch with Derek. If there was any real danger, he'd get you out of there. That's not the point, Wesley said. The point is that you lied to us, betrayed our trust. How have you betrayed my trust all these years? I asked quietly. Every time you've used me for your own purposes? Wesley lowered his eyes. Paris crossed her arms over her chest, but remained silent as well. I didn't mean to hurt you, I continued. I wanted you to understand how I felt. I wanted you to feel the same helplessness and frustration I felt every time I realized that you were only interested in my money and not in me. That's not true, Wesley objected, but without much conviction. We care about you. We do? I raised an eyebrow. Then why don't you ever ask how I'm doing? What I'm doing? What's bothering me? Why don't you ever just call without asking for money? Wesley and Paris looked at each other, clearly unsure of what to say. We're just used to you being all right, Wesley finally said. You've always been so self-sufficient. Self-sufficient? I grinned bitterly. Or just comfortable. I didn't complain, didn't cause trouble, just gave you money when you asked for it. The perfect wallet, wasn't it? Wesley flinched as if from a blow. Nessim, you never said it bothered you, he said after a pause. You always seemed happy to help. Because I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid that if I said no, you'd stop coming altogether. That I'd lose my last connection to you, Wesley, my only son. That admission seemed to shake him. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite pinpoint, a mixture of surprise, guilt, and perhaps realization. Yeah, I didn't know, he mumbled. I thought you just liked to spoil us. I love my son, I said quietly. I wanted you to have everything I didn't have, but somewhere along the way, it turned into something else, a relationship based not on love and respect, but on financial transactions. There was a long, heavy silence. I could see Wesley struggling with himself, the different emotions alternating on his face. I don't know what to say, he finally said. I didn't realize I treated you like that. Most people don't realize how they treat others until it's clearly shown to them, I said. That's why I arranged for you to have this educational experience. Paris, who had been silent until then, suddenly stood up. I'm not going to sit here and listen to these accusations, she said sharply. You put us in danger, humiliated us, made us suffer, and now you're trying to justify it with some high-minded talk about lessons in education? You're just a vindictive old man who can't bear to see his son living his life. Her words were like a slap in the face, but I didn't show how they hurt me. Paris, Wesley put his hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. No, Wes, I'm not going to be quiet. He ruined our vacation, put us through a real nightmare, and now he's sitting here lecturing us? I won't stand for it. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. I'll be in the car, she said over her shoulder. Don't be long. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Wesley and me alone. Paris can be emotional, he said after an awkward pause. I've noticed, I replied dryly. Wesley sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. Look, Dad, I realize that maybe we haven't always treated you the way we should have. And I'm sorry about that stupid wallet joke. But what you did, that was over the top. Maybe, I agreed. Surely, but sometimes it takes extreme measures to teach an important lesson. And what was the lesson you wanted to teach us? Wesley asked, and I heard genuine curiosity in his voice. That money is not the most important thing in life, I answered. That relationships should be built on mutual respect and care, not financial gain. That I was your father, not an ATM machine. Wesley was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. Hey, he said at last, when we were in that village, without communications, without the usual comforts, I thought a lot about life, about work, about how Paris and I live. And I realized that we're in some kind of meaningless race, always wanting more stuff, more fun, more luxuries, and we're never really satisfied. I listened to him with growing amazement. This was not the Wesley I'd known for the last few years. And those people in the village, he continued, they have almost nothing by our standards, but they seem happier, calmer. They spend time together, talking, singing, laughing. They don't sit staring at their phones like Paris and I do. He looked up at me, and I saw something new in his eyes, a glimmer of realization, maybe even wisdom. I'm not saying what you did was right, he said, but I'm beginning to understand why you did it. I felt something clench in my chest. Perhaps hope that not all is lost, that my son is still capable of reflection and growth. I'm sorry I had to resort to such measures, I said sincerely. I tried to talk to you before, but you wouldn't listen. I know, Wesley nodded. Yeah, I was too busy with my own things, my own problems. I wasn't paying attention to your feelings. A car horn honked outside. Paris was clearly losing patience. I have to go. Wesley stood up. We still have a lot to talk about, but not today. Paris is still too upset, and I need to process all of this. I got up too. I understand. Come back when you're ready. I'm always here. He took a step toward the door, but then suddenly stopped and turned to me. You know what the strangest thing is? He said with a slight smile. In spite of all the difficulties, at one point I almost enjoyed the experience. Felt alive, real, not just another office worker living the same script day after day. Sometimes getting out of your comfort zone is the only way to grow, I said. Yes, Wesley nodded. But next time, please just tell me if I'm being an asshole, without all those extreme measures. Deal, I smiled, feeling the tension between us ease a little. Another impatient beep from outside. I really have to go. Wesley headed for the door. I'll call you the other day, okay? I'll be waiting, I said. When the door closed behind him, I sank into the chair, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the confrontation hadn't gone as badly as I'd expected. Hope that perhaps my son had actually learned some kind of lesson from the experience. And anxiety because Paris clearly wasn't as conciliatory as Wesley. I wasn't fooling myself. This was only the first step. There were many more difficult conversations ahead, perhaps even fights. But at least the ice had been broken. For the first time in a long time, my son and I talked not about money, but about feelings, about relationships, about life values. As I sat in the silence of the empty house, I reflected on how strangely life works out sometimes. I had started this plan out of resentment and a desire for revenge, and in the end, it could lead to a real reconciliation, a new phase in our relationship with our son. Unless, of course, Paris got in the way. Her reaction was predictable. She was always thinking only of herself, of her own comfort and gain. I wasn't sure she was as capable of learning a lesson from this experience as Wesley was, and I was concerned about her influence on my son, but those were already problems for the future. Right now, I felt strangely calm and peaceful. I had expressed everything I had accumulated over the years. I was no longer the silent victim, giving away my money without complaint. I had stood up for myself, and it felt right. I glanced at the picture of Dorothea standing on the mantelpiece. Would you approve, Thea? I mentally asked, and I could almost hear her reply, You've put up with it too long, Orson. It was time to show them what they were losing by treating you so dismissively. Quentin called in the evening. So, Rebel, how was the meeting with the prodigal relatives? He asked with his usual directness. I told him about our conversation, Wesley's unexpected reaction, and Paris's anger. I'm not surprised, Quentin snorted when I was done. That plan of yours was like a litmus test of who was worth what. Wesley seems to be your son, a son capable of learning and reflection. And that daughter-in-law of yours, well, she just showed her true colors. Do you think Wesley will really change his attitude? I asked doubtfully. No, time will tell, Quentin said philosophically. But at least you've given him food for thought. And that's a lot. After talking with Quentin, I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about the future. What would happen next? Would my relationship with Wesley change? Would I ever be able to find common ground with Paris? And most importantly, was I ready for that change? Change is never easy, especially at my age. It would have been easier to go back to the old relationship model. I give money. They pretend to love me. But I knew I couldn't live like that anymore. Not after getting a taste of freedom and self-respect. Whatever the consequences of my educational experiment, I was ready for them. I was no longer afraid of losing my son because I realized the simple truth. If our relationship was only held together by money, I had actually lost him a long time ago. The week after our conversation passed in a strange silence. Wesley didn't call as promised. Paris hadn't shown any signs of life either. I didn't know what to think. Whether they were so offended that they decided to cut off communication with me, or whether they were just thinking about the situation, as Wesley had said. Either way, the silence gave me time to think. I took many walks in the neighborhood, sat in my garden watching the wind play with the leaves of Dorothea's roses, and thought about my life, past, present, and future. And gradually a decision ripened in me. I need a change, a radical change. I could no longer, and would no longer, continue to live my life as before, in a toxic relationship with my son and daughter-in-law, even if things would change after our conversation. On Thursday, I called Quentin. I've decided to move, I said without preamble when he answered. Move? Quentin sounded surprised. Where to? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I don't want to stay in Round Rock anymore. There are too many memories, too much baggage. Quentin said thoughtfully. What about Austin? Martha and I have been thinking about selling our house and buying something smaller for a long time. Too much hassle with a big lot at our age. We've got our eye on a small condo in a new senior complex on the north side of town. There are still a few vacant condos there. That sounds interesting. I imagine living next to my old friend, without the constant pressure from Wesley and Paris, and it seems surprisingly appealing. It's got everything you need to live comfortably, Quentin continued. A swimming pool, a gym, a common living room for gatherings. And most importantly, there's no gardening or repairs. It's all included in the monthly maintenance fee. How much does the apartment cost? I asked, mentally calculating my savings. Quentin said it was affordable, especially since I could get a lot more from my current house in Round Rock. I'll think about it, I promised, and maybe next week I'll come and see it. Great, Quentin sounded enthusiastic. Imagine how great it would be to be able to play chess every day, not just on Tuesdays. After talking to Quentin, I felt a surge of energy and determination. For the first time in a long time, I had a goal, a plan, something I really wanted for myself and not for others. The next day I called my attorney, Leonard Pratt. We had known each other for about 30 years. He had helped with the paperwork when Dorothy and I bought the house, and had handled all of our legal matters since then. Orson, I haven't heard from you in a while, Leonard greeted me. What can I do for you? I need to change my will, I said bluntly, and I'd like to consult on the sale of the house. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. These are big decisions, Leonard finally said. Are you sure? Absolutely, I said. When can I come over? We made an appointment for the next day. Leonard worked on Saturdays, and I was grateful for that. I wanted to get things done as soon as possible before I changed my mind. His office was quiet and cool, smelling of leather and paper. Leonard was dressed impeccably as always. A three-piece suit, despite the day off, his gray hair neatly slicked back. So, Orson, he said as we sat down at the table, tell me more about what you want to change in the will. I want to exclude Wesley, I answered bluntly. Completely. Leonard raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for me to continue. Over the past few years, our relationship deteriorated, I explained. Sarmama, he and his wife see me only as a source of money. I don't want to encourage that attitude anymore. I understand, Leonard nodded. But cutting him out completely is a big step. Are you sure you don't want to leave him at least something symbolic? I wondered. Leonard was right. Full exclusion could look like an act of revenge or resentment, and I wanted it to be a conscious decision based on common sense, not emotion. Okay, I agreed. Let's leave him my personal belongings, photos, books, family heirlooms, but all financial assets and real estate I want to bequeath to charity. What kind of charity? Leonard asked, making notes. I thought again. Dorothea always supported educational programs for underprivileged children. She said that education is the key to a better life, and if a child has the opportunity to learn, he or she has a chance to change his or her destiny. The Bright Future Foundation, I said. They help children from poor families to get an education. Dorothea supported them. Leonard wrote it down and raised his eyes to me. Do you realize that Wesley could contest the will? As an only child, he has certain rights. Let him try, I said firmly. I have the right to manage my estate, and I'm not leaving him destitute. He's got a good job, a house, savings, everything I've already given him. Leonard nodded and continued filling out the paperwork. What about the house? He asked after a while. Did you say you wanted to sell it? Yes, I confirmed. I plan to move to Austin, to a condominium for seniors. It's near my friend Quentin Miller. I know some good realtors who could help with the sale, Leonard suggested. It's a good seller's market right now, especially in your neighborhood. We discussed the details and I signed all the necessary paperwork. When I walked out of Leonard's office, I felt strangely relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The decision had been made. The first steps had been taken. On my way home, I stopped by the real estate agency Leonard had recommended. A young woman named Samantha listened to me enthusiastically and promised to come back the following week to appraise the house. She also showed me several condominium options in Austin on her computer, including the one Quentin had mentioned. This is a great complex, she said, showing me the pictures. It's new, it's well maintained, and it's designed specifically for seniors. It has all the amenities you need and 24-hour medical care if you need it. On Wednesday, I drove to Austin to look at the condo. Quentin met me at the entrance to the complex, a modern 3-story building surrounded by a manicured garden. How do you like it? He asked as we walked up the path to the main entrance. It looks impressive, I admitted. Inside, we were greeted by a smiling, middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Janet, the complex manager. She led us through the common areas, a spacious lobby with comfortable chairs and tables, a dining room where residents could eat if they didn't want to cook for themselves, a small gymnasium adapted for the elderly. And this is our pride, Janet said, opening the door to a large, bright room with bookcases along the walls. Our library and games room, chess tournaments, literary evenings, and other events are held here. Janet then showed us the available apartments. I especially liked one on the second floor, with a balcony overlooking the park. It was smaller than my current home, of course, but it was spacious, bright, and most importantly, no stairs, long corridors, or other obstacles that could be a problem at my age. All the apartments are equipped with an emergency call system, Janet explained, pointing to the buttons on the walls. In case of a fall or other problem, all you have to do is push the button and medical personnel will arrive within a minute. On the way home, I thought about what I had seen. I like the complex, modern, comfortable, with a friendly atmosphere. And most importantly, I would be there with Quentin, a man who never saw me as a source of money, but simply as a friend. In the evening, I called Samantha and told her I was ready to make an offer on the apartment in Austin. She promised to have all the paperwork ready by the end of the week. Then I called Wesley and told him my decision. Are you sure, Dad? He asked. It's a big step. I'm sure, I said firmly. I loved it there, and I think I can start a new life. What about us? I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I mean, I understand that you have every right to move, but we're going to see a lot less of each other. Austin's not that far away, I pointed out. An hour away. You can come whenever you want. The next afternoon, Paris called me for the first time since they'd returned from Mexico. Orson, honey, she began in her usual sweet tone. Wesley tells me you're planning to move. Is that true? Yes, Paris, I confirmed. I found an apartment in Austin, and I'm going to sell the house. But it's so, sudden, she sounded worried. Are you sure you've thought this through? I've been thinking about it for a long time, I said firmly. I just found the right thing to do now. Orson, I know we haven't always gotten along, but I'd hope that after the trip incident, we could start over. Make things right. I hope so too, Paris, I said. But I need some distance to do that. I can't go on living the way I've been living. What about, finances? She asked cautiously. D'accord, you're not going to leave us without support, are you? That's it. The real reason for her call. It wasn't concern for me. It wasn't concern for a relationship. It was concern for money. I've already changed my will, I said bluntly, and I will no longer be funding your lifestyle. But Orson, her voice trembled, we're a family. Family supports each other. Yes, Paris, a family supports each other, I agreed. Das anyone. But support isn't just money. It's caring, respect, attention. Things I haven't gotten from you in years. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Yeah, I understand, Paris said finally, her voice a mixture of frustration and anger. Well, do what you want, but don't think Wesley's just going to let it go. You're his father, after all. Exactly, I said quietly. I'm his father, not his ATM. I hung up the phone feeling oddly relieved. For the first time, I'd told Paris what I really thought without fear of repercussion. It was, liberating. Over the next few weeks, events moved quickly. I signed all the necessary paperwork to buy the condo in Austin and sell the house in Round Rock. Samantha found buyers surprisingly quickly, a young couple with a child who liked the neighborhood and the house itself. Wesley tried to talk to me several times about my decision, but I was adamant. I wasn't going to give up on my plans even when he implied that my excluding them from the will was cruel and unfair. I gave you everything I could when you needed it, I told him during one of these conversations. Now I want to use my money to help those who really need it. Children who don't have the opportunities you had. But we're your family, Wesley insisted, though his voice was no longer as confident as before. And I'll always love you like a son, I said softly. But I won't be your ATM anymore. It's different, Wesley, and the sooner you realize that, the better for our relationship. Moving day came in late October, a clear, cool day with blue skies and a light breeze. Quentin arrived to help with the last of the boxes. Wesley showed up too without Paris. She couldn't make it, he said awkwardly. She has a meeting at the salon. We all realized it was an excuse, but no one commented. When the last box was loaded into the truck, I walked around the house one last time. Empty, quiet, without furniture or personal belongings, it seemed strangely impersonal, as if all the 40 years Dorothea and I had spent here had been just a dream. Ready? Quentin asked, standing in the doorway. I nodded, took one last look at the empty living room, and walked out without looking back. The new apartment greeted me with fresh renovations and sunlight streaming in through the large windows. Quentin, Wesley, and I quickly unloaded the boxes and set up the furniture. When most of the work was done, Wesley awkwardly stomped to the door. Well, I guess I'll be going, he said. Is everything okay with you? Everything's great, I smiled. Thanks for your help, son. He nodded, hesitated a moment, and then suddenly stepped toward me and hugged me tightly. I'll miss you, Dad, he said quietly. I'll miss you too, I answered, feeling an unexpected warmth in my chest. But you can always come to visit, alone. He understood the unspoken without Paris and nodded. I will, I promise. When the door closed behind him, Quentin clapped me on the shoulder. So, man, how's the new place feeling? I looked around, a small but cozy apartment, my favorite books on the shelves, Dorothea's picture on the table by the window overlooking the park. No more manipulation, no more jokes about my wallet, no more feeling like I was being used. You know, I said with a smile, I feel free for the first time in a long, long time.